So is the Kremlin's message about the invasion of Ukraine still convincing Russian audiences? Keir Giles is Senior Consulting Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House, a think tank in London. Keir Giles, welcome. So Victory Day in Russia, but not the Victory Day perhaps that President Putin had hoped for by now.
Well, certainly President Putin wanted to be holding this Victory Day parade in Kiev, but the fact that Russia's war went so very badly wrong from the very early stages is just another aspect of this misguided understanding of what's happening in the rest of the world, this fantasy that Russia's created for itself that we heard described in this speech by President Putin, talking about the rest of the world getting ready to attack Russia, talking about Ukraine developing nuclear weapons, none of it having any basis in fact. And of course, that's the reason why this war has gone so catastrophically wrong for Russia and why President Putin needs to cling on to Russia's past victories and commemorate those.
Can we judge the level of support for this war in Russia or awareness of the losses and military setbacks?
It's exceptionally hard to tell, partly because Russia has worked very hard at making sure that information from the outside world doesn't reach large sectors of its population. Now, people do express support for the war, and it's really hard to tell whether that is because they are afraid of the consequences of doing anything else, because after all, there are immediate punitive consequences for people who disagree with Russia's state line, or whether they simply genuinely don't know what is happening outside the country because of those very effective measures that Russia has taken to make sure that they don't.
When will the Russian public feel the impact of economic sanctions, and where has it left the country in terms of international standing?
To some extent, the effects are already being felt. The ruble exchange rate, which has a direct impact on people's standard of living in Russia, plummeted as soon as sanctions were imposed, and now the central bank of Russia is having to pour enormous amounts into propping it up. But to other extents, there were parts of the Russian population which will feel very little impact because they were so isolated from the standards of living around them in Europe. And we can see that in the way that Russian soldiers have reacted to the way they have found rural Ukrainians living very much better than they do at home simply because they live outside Russia. But that pattern of international isolation is really the only thing that is likely to change Russia's behavior and attitude towards its neighbors in the long term. Certainly from Europe and from North America, it has been isolated economically, but it still has support from other parts of the world that are undermining the effect of those sanctions. For as long as Russia can find customers for its energy in other parts of the world to prop up its hard currency reserves, it won't feel the full impact of all of those economic measures that have been taken to try to dissuade it from these wars of aggression.
Where does this war go from here, from Russia's perspective?
It certainly seems that Russia is buckling down for the long haul. It's true, a lot of people were expecting some kind of punctuation to the war today in Putin's speech, some kind of declaration that they'd achieved at least some limited success, or alternatively, stepping up the war to a new level, moving into a new gear by declaring a mobilization of Russia to actually win it. Instead, Russia is scraping the barrel for manpower to replace all of the casualties and the units that have been mauled in Ukraine itself. And in order to do that, they're mobilizing people in the occupied territories. They're recruiting in Syria. They're bringing in private military companies, mercenaries, anything they can so as not to actually let the Russian people at large know that there is a war and that Russia is losing it.
Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House in London. Thank you very much.